Before we begin, let me ask you to notice something. The room is quiet. Your mind perhaps is not, and somewhere between those two spaces is the question we are really here to sit with. Why would a man who spent nearly a century thinking carefully, slowly, patiently, feel uneasy in a world that moves so fast, speaks so loudly, and rewards so quickly? Take a breath with me for a moment. There is no rush. This is not a debate, and it is not an attack. It is a reflection. When people say that Charlie Munger hates today's influencer culture, what they often mean is something softer and yet much deeper. It is not anger. It is not bitterness. It is a quiet discomfort. The kind that comes from watching a world drift away from values you believe help human beings live better, steadier, more meaningful lives. Munger grew up in a time where progress was slow enough to be felt, where learning required effort, where reputation was built over decades, not weeks, and where wisdom was something you earned by being wrong, repeatedly, and paying attention to why now. Pause for a second. Just pause. Look at the world we are in today. A world where attention is currency, where visibility is mistaken for value, where confidence, even when empty, is rewarded more quickly than understanding, and where speed often replaces depth. This is not a moral judgment. It is simply an observation. Charlie Munger spent his life studying how people misjudge reality, not in an abstract way, but in a very human way. He watched intelligent people make foolish decisions, not because they were stupid, but because they were impatient, emotional, or seduced by simple stories. And influencer culture, modern influencer culture especially, is built almost entirely on simple stories. You can feel this if you slow down enough to notice it. Most influencers are not trying to teach you how the world actually works. They are trying to hold your attention. And attention, by its nature, favors what is loud, fast, emotional, and easy to digest. Munger believed that the world is complex, that good decisions require multiple lenses, that reality rarely fits into a single quote, a single hack, or a single mindset. And so, when he looked at influencer culture, he didn't see evil. He saw oversimplification. He saw people selling certainty in a world that demands humility. There is a deep difference between knowing something and sounding like you know something. Influencer culture rewards the sound. It rewards the confident tone, the polished aesthetic, the certainty delivered in 60 seconds or less, but wisdom, real wisdom, almost never speaks that way. Wisdom hesitates. Wisdom qualifies. Wisdom says, I might be wrong, far more often than it says, here is the secret. Munger understood that most of life's important lessons cannot be rushed. You cannot compress decades of experience into a reel without losing the very thing that made the experience valuable. And this is where the tension begins, because modern platforms do not reward patience. They reward immediacy. They do not reward saying, this is complicated. They reward saying, do this one thing and everything will change. Munger spent his life warning people about incentives, about how systems shape behavior. And influencer culture is a system with very clear incentives. The incentive is not truth. The incentive is engagement. Now, take another breath. This is not about blaming individuals. Most influencers are responding exactly as the system encourages them to respond. They are not villains. They are participants. But Munger would say that a system that rewards shallow certainty will eventually produce shallow thinking. He believed that human psychology is fragile, that we are easily persuaded by confidence, by repetition, by social proof, and influencer culture amplifies all three at once. When millions of people repeat the same simplified idea, it begins to feel true, even if it isn't complete, even if it's misleading, even if it quietly removes all the nuance that actually matters. Munger valued inversion. He would ask, what could go wrong? Influencer culture rarely asks that question because doubt does not perform well. Doubt does not go viral. Tainty does, and yet life is built on probabilities, not promises. This is one of the quiet reasons Munger was uneasy. Influencer culture often presents life as if it were a set of guarantees. Follow this routine, adopt this mindset, buy this course, and success will follow. But Munger knew something uncomfortable. He knew that effort does not always lead to reward, that intelligence doesn't. OT always protects you from failure, and that luck plays a much larger role than most people are willing to admit. Influencer culture, by contrast, often edits luck out of the story, because luck does not sell well. If you admit that timing, randomness, and circumstance matter, then the illusion of control weakens, and control is what people are buying. Munger was deeply skeptical of narratives that flatter the ego, and influencer culture is, at its core, ego-friendly. It says you are just one trick away. It says you are special. It says others failed because they didn't know what you now know. These are comforting ideas. They are also dangerous because they encourage people to underestimate reality. Munger believed that one of the greatest human weaknesses is the tendency to overestimate our understanding. Influencer culture often accelerates that weakness. When information is packaged as entertainment, it loses friction, and friction, uncomfortable as it is often what forces us to think. Munger read constantly, not to feel smart, but to be less wrong. Influencer culture rarely encourages being less wrong. It encourages being more visible. There is also anything else, quieter, more human. Munger believed in delayed gratification, in building something slowly, in letting compounding do its work, not just financially, but intellectually and morally. Influencer culture struggles with delay. It is built on immediacy, on instant feedback, on likes, shares, views now. And when your sense of worth is tied to immediate reaction, something subtle happens. Inside you begin to optimize for approval rather than truth, for applause rather than understanding. Munger would not say this angrily. He would say it almost sadly, because he knew how difficult it is to resist incentives. He knew that even intelligent people bend under pressure. He often warned about man with a hammer thinking, when all you have is one tool, everything looks like a nail. Influencer culture often turns one idea into a universal answer, one mindset into a solution for every problem, one story into a template for all lives. But human lives are not templates. They are messy, contextual, contradictory. Munger respected that messiness. Influencer culture often edits it out. And then there is the issue of character. Munger believed that who you become matters more than what you achieve, that habits of honesty, patience, and discipline shape outcomes in ways that are hard to measure but impossible to ignore. Influencer culture often focuses on outcomes without deeply examining the character required to sustain them. Success is displayed. Struggle is minimized. Failure is reframed quickly, if acknowledged at all. But real growth often happens in silence. Without an audience, without validation. Munger understood that some of the most important work you will ever do, no one will clap for. And so when he looked at influencer culture, he didn't see a threat to wealth. He saw a threat to thinking. He worried that people were learning how to perform intelligence rather than cultivate it, how to look confident rather than be careful, how to chaz signals rather than build substance. This is not nostalgia. It is not a longing for the past. It is a concern about human attention. Attention shapes perception. Perception shapes decisions. Decisions shape lives. Munger took that chain very seriously. Influencer culture, in its most extreme form, fragments attention. It trains the mind to move quickly, react emotionally, and avoid discomfort. But deep understanding requires the opposite. It requires stillness, repetition, boredom, sometimes. Munger was comfortable with boredom. Influencer culture is not. And yet, boredom is often where insight begins. When nothing is stimulating you, the mind starts connecting ideas. It starts reflecting. It starts seeing patterns. Munger believed that wisdom emerges when ideas collide slowly. Over time, influencer culture rarely allows ideas to sit long enough to collide. Now let's be gentle here. Not all influencers are shallow. Not all short-form content is harmful. Tools are not inherently good or bad. Munger knew that too. The danger lies in mistaking the tool for the teacher, in confusing popularity with insight, in assuming that because something feels inspiring, it must be true. Munger would remind us that feelings are not facts, and that the mind is easily fooled, especially when it wants to be. He spent his life trying to reduce foolishness, not promote brilliance, because he believed avoiding obvious errors mattered more than chasing extraordinary gains. Influencer culture often does the opposite. It encourages risk without fully explaining cost, confidence, without proportional competence, and over time that gap becomes painful. What Munger really resisted was not influencers, but illusion. The illusion that life is simple. The illusion that success is formulaic. The illusion that wisdom can be downloaded. He believed wisdom must be lived, and living takes time. So if there is a quiet lesson here, it is not reject modern culture. It is slow down inside it. Listen carefully. Question gently. Hold ideas longer before accepting them. Munger would not ask you to disconnect from the world. He would ask you to engage with it more thoughtfully, to notice incentives, to question certainty, to value depth over display, and perhaps most importantly, to remain humble in the face of complexity, because the world is not impressed by how quickly you speak. It responds to how well you understand. And understanding, real understanding, grows quietly, like interest, like character, like wisdom. So as we come to a pause here, not an ending, just a pause, you might notice something subtle, a sense that the loudest voices are not always the clearest, that the fastest answers are rarely the most reliable, and that a life built slowly, thoughtfully, and with care often makes far less noise but far more sense. And that realization, when it arrives, does not shout, it simply sits with you. The quiet cost of influencer culture on how we think is not something that announces itself loudly. It doesn't arrive as a crisis. It doesn't feel like a loss at first. It feels convenient. It feels efficient. It feels like progress. And that is exactly why it is so easy to miss. When information comes to us neatly packaged, confidently delivered, and emotionally appealing, the mind relaxes. It stops questioning. It stops pushing back. It stops doing the slow, effortful work of thinking for itself. This is not because people have become weaker. It is because the environment has changed. Our minds adapt to what they We're repeatedly exposed to. When we are surrounded by fast answers, we become uncomfortable with slow questions. When we are fed certainty, we lose patience for ambiguity. And when every idea is reduced to a punchline, we forget how to sit with complexity. Influencer culture trains the mind to expect clarity without effort, but real understanding is rarely that kind. It is often confusing at first. It contradicts itself. It asks you to hold two opposing ideas at the same time and resist the urge to resolve them too quickly. That discomfort is not a flaw. It is a signal that learning is happening. Yet modern digital culture quietly teaches us to escape discomfort as fast as possible. Scroll, swipe, move on. Over time, something subtle changes in how we think. We begin to mistake familiarity for truth. If we hear an idea often enough, from enough confident voices, it starts to feel obvious, not because it has been examined deeply, but because it has been repeated smoothly. This is one of the quiet costs. Another is the erosion of intellectual humility. When ideas are presented as finished products rather than evolving understandings, we stop seeing knowledge as something provisional. We stop saying, I don't know yet. We stop allowing ourselves to be learners. Instead, we become collectors of opinions. And opinions are easy to acquire. They require very little commitment. You can adopt them instantly and discard them just as quickly. But thinking is different. Thinking asks something of you. It asks for time. It asks for attention. It asks for the willingness to be wrong and stay with that wrongness long enough to learn from it. Influencer culture rarely rewards that process. What it rewards is resolution, a clean takeaway, a confident conclusion. And slowly, without realizing it, we begin to shape our inner world around what performs well rather than what is true. Even our sense of self can become performative. We start thinking in terms of how ideas look, not how they function, how they sound, not how they hold up under pressure. This is not about rejecting modern platforms. It is about noticing how they shape us, because the deepest changes are not in what we believe, but in how we arrive at belief. If thinking becomes reactive, rushed, and externally guided, we lose something precious. We lose the ability to sit quietly with a problem. Think slowly to let ideas mature, and that loss does not feel dramatic, it feels normal. Until one day, stillness feels uncomfortable, silence feels empty, and complexity feels exhausting. That is the quiet cost. Not that we stop thinking entirely, but that we stop thinking deeply. And depth, once lost, is not easily recovered. It must be rebuilt gently, patiently, one unhurried thought a time. Slow thinking in a fast world is not a popular idea. It does not feel efficient. It does not feel impressive. And it certainly does not feel aligned with the rhythm of modern life, where speed is praised and hesitation is often mistaken for weakness. Yet this is exactly where one of Charlie Munger's most important lessons quietly lives. Munger believed that most serious mistakes in life are not caused by a lack of intelligence, but by a lack of patience. People think too quickly, they react before they understand, they choose before they have fully seen the consequences. In a fast world, thinking slowly feels almost rebellious. We are surrounded by instant opinions, instant explanations, instant certainty. When something happens, we are expected to have a reaction immediately, to know where we stand, to declare what it means. But Munger understood something deeply human. The mind needs time to digest reality. Good judgment does not arrive in a rush. It forms quietly as ideas are tested against experience, against other ideas, against time itself. Munger was famous for sitting still, for waiting, for doing nothing when nothing needed to be done. This wasn't laziness, it was discipline. Slow thinking, as Munger practiced it, meant resisting the urge to act just to feel productive. It meant allowing uncertainty to exist without rushing to resolve it. It meant saying, "I don't know yet." And being comfortable there. In a fast world, discomfort is something we try to escape. We fill every gap with noise, every pause with stimulation. But slow thinking requires silence. It requires the ability to sit with a problem long enough for its true shape to reveal itself. Often the first answer that comes to mind is the weakest one. It is shaped by emotion, habit, or social pressure. Ayer warned against this kind of automatic thinking. He believed that the brain, left unchecked, looks for shortcuts, and shortcuts feel good, but they are often wrong. Instead, he practiced deliberate thinking, careful thinking, thinking that moves step by step, asking not just what could go right, but what could go wrong. This habit is especially important in a world that constantly encourages action. Buy now, respond now, decide now. Munger understood that speed amplifies errors. When you move quickly in the wrong direction, you don't just fail, you compound the failure. Slow thinking acts as a filter. It removes emotional noise. It separates signal from distraction. It also cultivates humility. When you slow down, you begin to notice how little you actually know, not in a discouraging way, but in a grounding way. You become less attached to being right and more interested in being accurate. This shift changes everything. Decisions become calmer. Reactions become softer. Confidence becomes quieter, rooted not in certainty, but in understanding limits. Munger believed that wisdom grows when ideas are allowed to collide gently over time, not when they are forced into conclusions. In a fast world, slow thinking is not about falling behind. It is about choosing direction over speed, because moving fast without clarity does not lead you forward. It only moves you away from stillness, from depth, from insight. And perhaps the most important lesson Munger offers is this: you don't need to keep up with the world to live wisely in it. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is pause, breathe, and think just a little more slowly than everyone else. When attention becomes the product, the world changes in ways that are subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but profound if you take the time to. Notice, it is not just the way media works today, it is the way our minds are trained to move, to react, to value certain things over others. Every notification, every scroll, every trending post is carefully designed to capture and hold your focus, and in doing so, to shape how you think and feel. Attention, once a personal resource, becomes a commodity, and we become both the product and the consumer. This shift is quiet, and that is part of its power. It doesn't demand that you notice it. It doesn't force you to respond. It simply rewards those who engage quickly and consistently, and leaves the thoughtful observer a little out of step with the rhythm of the world. Our attention, which once wandered naturally, now bends to the direction of algorithms, to the pull of viral content, to the emotional hooks that perform better than quiet reflection. When attention is treated as a product, the incentives of the world change. Ideas that are simple, sensational, and emotionally charged rise to the top, while subtlety, depth, and nuance struggle to survive. Our brains adapt to this environment. We learn to value stimulation over understanding, speed over comprehension, and certainty for careful consideration. In this way, the very architecture of modern influence begins to reshape not just what we know, but how we know it. It is not that influencers are inherently misleading or dishonest. Most are responding to the incentives the system has built. They provide what people click on, what people watch, what people share, and the system rewards them for doing so. But the human cost, though quiet, is real. When we constantly chase attention, we train our minds to seek approval, to favor performance over substance, and to mistake visibility for value. The most important work, the thinking, the learning, the observing, often happens in silence. And silence does not perform. Charlie Munger observed that human beings are remarkably prone to misjudgment. We overestimate our understanding, underestimate uncertainty, and simplify reality in ways that are comforting but dangerous. Modern influence, by turning attention into currency, amplifies these tendencies. Ideas that are repeated confidently gain authority, not because they have been tested or understood, but because they have been seen enough to feel familiar. Familiarity, in turn, breeds acceptance, and acceptance often masquerades as truth. And yet there is a lesson here that is not pessimistic, but reflective. The cost of attention is not irreversible. It is something we can notice, something we can resist, something we can redirect. We can choose stillness over scroll, contemplation over reaction, depth over display. By reclaiming our attention, we reclaim the very soil in which thought, creativity, and wisdom grow. When attention becomes the product, the quiet resistance is to pay attention differently, not more, but more deliberately, more carefully, and with more awareness of what we allow to shape us. It is in this space, this slow, attentive space, that insight, clarity, and true understanding can still emerge. And perhaps in noticing this, we begin to see the world not just as it is sold to us, but as truly is.